Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the launch of All the Places We Will Go. My name is Ritchie Mehta, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Evans. We're really thrilled that all of you could join us today, and for all the subsequent shows as well. So Jordan is going to keep you all in the loop for all the shows that we have coming up for you in Series 1, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. You're in for an absolutely epic ride as we take you on a journey. We're going to really kind of dissect the highs and lows of all our guests, as well as share some of the latest marketing and business insights straight from leaders within the industry. We really want to unpack the how did they do it type of situation. It's not just about learning how they, the road that they travel, but also helping us to carve our own paths to achieve our goals. So the first thing I have to say is thank you everybody for taking your time this morning to be here. It genuinely would be rather lonely if you didn't make it. So, it's great to have you all with us and so many familiar faces as well. It goes without saying that we've got an absolutely fantastic guest this morning to launch the inaugural show, and he comes with no need for any introductions. Mark Ritson is with us this evening, I would say, Mark, for you, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's I'm unmuting. It's early evening here, and I am drinking a beer. So I want to emphasize the fact that I'm not an alcoholic. Well, I might be, but it's an appropriate time to be drinking where I am. It's 5 o'clock, which is beer o'clock in Tasmania, where I live.
Okay, well, there you go. And so, by the way, everyone, for the remainder of the show, and for the fact that I'm not trying to create any confusion, I'm going to call Mark Ritson just Ritson, as we've agreed, not being rude, but we just don't want to get confused. So look, before we get stuck in, just a few housekeeping rules just to bear in mind. The first one is video is completely optional. We recognize that unlike Mark, we all are pretty much getting up in the morning, certainly in the UK. And so if you want to put your video on, by all means do, love to see you. And if you don't, you're getting ready, that's fine too. We only request that you just stay on mute. And finally, if you've got any questions for Mark, and this is going to be the major thrust of the show, is trying to answer all of your questions. We're going to get through as many as we can. Just write them in the conversation box, and we will come to them, and we'll try and cover as many as absolutely possible. Now, just before we get on to the show, we thought it'd be a good idea, given it's the first time we're doing this, that we'll give you a little bit of insight into how the show, the theme, the concept came about. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Mark Evans to tell us a little bit about what the show is all about.
Thank you, Ritchie, and good morning, everybody. And again, thank you to Mark Ritson for joining us for the first show. I'll come on to intro Mark in a little bit, but what I thought was worthwhile doing was just to talk about what's the anchor point for the show. And it's this book, if I can get it right in front of me. There we go. Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss's last book, in fact, printed in 1991. So this is a child's adventure through weird and wonderful places. And to a child, it would just seem like a good old adventure. But through the eyes of an adult, this is a story about the fact that you will be happy, you will be content, you will be successful, and you will be fulfilled. But not every day. And it may not be for this moment, this day, this month, this project, this part of your career. But it's the undulations that give you energy and indeed make for an interesting story. So the aim of this show is to inspire you by giving you some insight into how some great people have made it in the world, not despite the ups and downs, but because of the ups and downs. And so expose some of those bumps in the road. So it will be a blend between marketing and business, as we said, but also understanding what makes people tick, some of their vulnerabilities. And hopefully that will be a shot in the arm. This is to inspire. And particularly as I know some of the folks on this call have just recently lost their jobs. We're in tough times, right? So hopefully this will be an inspiring moment for everybody to take some energy from on their own undulating journey. So back to you, Ritchie, to explain how we'll run the show.
Hey, thanks, Mark. That's great. So look, we're going to keep this format really simple. We've got a couple of preset questions that we're going to ask Ritson to kind of give us his viewpoint on to begin with, but we love going off piste. And as soon as we've got some stimulus and questions coming from the crowd, that's exactly where we're going to head. So literally, as soon as you can, put some questions down. The whole point is to really try and get into the psyche of Mark Ritson here today. So please try and do that. And he's already promised us to be completely transparent, honest, and no skeleton in the closet is too far where he won't go, is what he's said already. So there we go. Let's see what juice we can dig out over the next hour or so. Mark, we've already, no need for an introduction, but we thought it's only suiting and fitting, given this is our first show, that Mark Evans is going to do a small, warm introduction to Mark Ritson.
Okay, I'll keep it brief because I'm sure we'll have lots of questions that are coming in. So Mark is, without doubt, one of the highest profile figures in the world of marketing. He is probably most famously known as a Marketing Week columnist. He pulls no punches, and it's, personally speaking, it's probably every marketer's worst fear to be called out for Mark for doing some rubbish marketing. So he has a very critical eye, but that critical eye comes from two places. The first is Mark is a marketing professor who spent 25 years teaching marketing to MBA students at some of the world's very top business schools. Secondly, he's actually done a bit of marketing. He's had many years' experience working as a global brand consultant across a wide range of high-profile brands. He also does a cracking keynote, and more recently, he's built up the Marketing Week Mini Mba, some of which some people on this call I know have done that, which I think has become one of the go-to marketing learning options that I can personally vouch for, actually. He is no shrinking violet. He does like to swear a little, and I'm sure I won't disappoint on that. So buckle up for a fun ride, and thank you again, Mark, for joining us. So back to you, Ritchie, get us started with the questions.
Awesome. Right, first question. Ritson, how fulfilled are you at the moment?
Oh, pretty fulfilled, I reckon, Ritchie. What can I say? I'm happily married for many, many years. I've got a healthy, very happy, well-adjusted, almost 4-year-old, and probably another one on the way, which is the main thing. That's all going pretty well. I've got enough money to see me out. I'm not incredibly rich, but I've got enough dough to not have to worry too much about future dough, which is my idea of having enough. And I like what I do. I enjoy the way I've structured it these days. It's in a good place. So I really cannot complain. I would say to you, we've had a very good lockdown in the sense that compared to the pain that many people have suffered, Australia has had it very light. We've only had 100 deaths, and Tasmania has had it even lighter. I live right down the bottom of Australia in an island called Tasmania. We've had about, I think, 10 deaths and nothing for 2 months. So we've been back to normal now for about a month. So yeah, I really have no place to complain about anything. It's been very, very good for quite a while.
Awesome. Mark, let me ask, as Steve Jobs sort of famously said, you can only join the dots in hindsight. Join some of the dots for us in your life.
Yeah, I suppose it's a very good quote because it certainly applies to me. I was always a marketer from the very, very start. So I went to university and did marketing. I worked in marketing for a couple of years. I did a PhD in marketing. I only ever wanted to do marketing. So that bit was a very straight line. But the way I ended up being a professor was very odd in the sense that I became a marketing professor because I like marketing. There are many marketing professors who became marketing professors because they like being professors. And that certainly wasn't me. So I had this how honest do you want us to be here, Ritchie? You give me I can tell you the full story if you want, but.
Do it. Absolutely.
All right. Okay. You asked for it. So I'd done an undergraduate degree in marketing, which was very good, at Lancaster University. And I'd basically met in a pub in London an extraordinarily attractive Swedish au pair called Jenny Lindstrom, who I'd hooked up with, and we were having a fantastic time. And then I was working for a year in London. I had to go back and finish my degree. So we said our goodbyes. She was still in London. I was in Lancaster, and we didn't really see much of each other. And then I was in my final year of my marketing degree, and I saw an ad for a scholarship called the Turon Scholarship, which is a scholarship to get a degree, a postgraduate degree at either Wharton or Harvard. And I thought, well, I'll go for that. You know what I mean? And so I applied for it, and they shortlisted me along with essentially 19 people at Oxford and Cambridge. There was one person from a red brick, which was me. And so I went down to London ostensibly because I could see Jenny for the weekend, and you got to stay in this fancy hotel in Mayfair. And, you know, when you're a poor undergraduate student and you've got a smoking hot Swedish girlfriend down in London, frankly, that was my main consideration. In fact, that was about 98% of it. But I went for the 2-day selection event, and no, everybody liked me, but no one was going to give me there were very serious people from Oxford and Cambridge, and there was me, who was clearly having a hell of a time. And then something rather strange happened right at the end. So the Turon Award is sponsored by a wonderful man called Sir John Turon, who was a very, very rich man, who was the head of the judging committee. And he met me and I met him. I was the last interview of the day, and I'd met 7 or 8 scholars from University of Pennsylvania. I could tell I was not going to get anything, but I was having a good time and I was being nice to everyone, and I was getting a free hotel. And I met Sir John, and the first thing he did is he's a beautiful man with slick back hair, long gone now, in his 70s back then. And he said to me, "Please call me Tiger." And his nickname was Tiger Turon. And Tiger said, "Tell me about your parents." And I said, "All right, I'll tell you about my parents." And the thing that makes my parents special is my elder brother, who's sadly no longer with us, we were involved in a very bad car accident when I was a kid. And my dad, who was a chemist, gave it all up to look after my brother, who was, handicapped for the rest of his life. And so I told him, I said, "Look, my parents are my heroes because what they've done is amazing, And then he said, "So, and are you enjoying yourself here?" And then I said, "Well, I'll be honest with you, Sir John." And he said, "Please, call me Tiger." I said, "Look, I've got this smoking hot girlfriend, Jenny Lindstrom, upstairs on your tab at the hotel in Mayfair. I said, you're not sending me to the University of Pennsylvania. I know that, but I'm really having a great time. And when we're finished here, I'm going to go back upstairs and have more fun than the other 19 candidates put together." And he took a lot, and this is absolutely true. He took a long look at me, this giant cigar, and he'd had 2 days of boring interviews with nice but incredibly dull people from Cambridge and Oxford. And we talked a little bit more about me and Jenny and stuff. And he took his cigar out and took a big puff out of it. And I remember to this day, he put it down and just took out a pen and wrote next to my name, "In." And and he said, "You can have the others for the scholarships, but I want him to go." And so I got a full scholarship to go to Wharton to do an MBA, which, I was 23 and I was too young. So Wharton, to their credit, said, "Well, look, we don't know what to do with you because you've got a full scholarship and you're a Turon scholar, but you're 23 and you've got a year's work experience. You can't come into the MBA program. So we'll put you on hold for at least a year and then we'll smuggle you in." And then Lancaster said, "Well, if you're going to do a postdoc, don't do an MBA. Come to Lancaster, do a PhD in marketing." So I started a PhD in marketing at Lancaster, at which point Wharton said, "Look, you've got 2 years of funding and Tiger's giving us a hard time. Would you please come and do part of your PhD at Wharton?" So I went to Wharton with an office at Wharton next to Paul Green, who invented Conjoint, and hung around there for a year, learning from all the titans of marketing, which back in about 1993, 94, all the great thinkers, Jerry Wind was there, Paul Green, Dave Reebstein was there. And so I learned from this incredible group. And when I finished my PhD in Philadelphia, I was one of the hottest marketing candidates because, I'd come out of Wharton and I had a different take on things. And I stayed in the American system and became a professor. And really, and that was 26 years ago. And that's really how it started. And the only other twist is, so I started out at the University of Minnesota, which was a school I felt like I was 26 when I started. So it was a school I felt like I could get away with it, frankly, and be a professor at that young age. Did about 4 or 5 years there. And then Harvard offered me a job. And so did London Business School.
We have a freeze.
I think somewhere in Tasmania, there might have been a bit of a power cut or a Wi-Fi drop.
Yeah, I reckon that's a blunt freeze.
Let's give it a second. Mark, what's your take? What I loved about what Ritson was just talking about was even from his young early days, he realized the importance of differentiation, and he flipped differentiated himself in such a cool way, even at that early moment. What's your take on that?
So he's a character. Everyone's already seen that, what a character he is. And I love this comment here from Jordan. Mark's not shy about his smoking hot girlfriend. I hope his wife isn't on the call. He is a character. So we'll balance marketing and personal questions, but what's underneath the hood, in terms of some of the challenges Mark's faced, and we've all got imposter syndrome, unless you're a sociopath or narcissist. So we might find out a little bit about some of the challenges he's had along the way. But just have to wait for him to drop back in.
Do you think the importance of differentiation is actually critical at this time too? We've seen a lot of, and Mark posted that great article on Marketing Week where he talked about all sort of the COVID advertising and the similar piano playing in the background. So jumping on the bandwagon versus actually differentiating. What's your take?
Yeah, I think actually Mark said we'll play a game in a month or two, which is around about now, of all those lovely, emotive, engaging, warm, fluffy COVID ads. Guess the brand, because they're all the same and undifferentiated. But it's hopefully something we'll get his view on if he comes back. Differentiation versus distinctiveness, because different schools of thought would say they're different, relatively more or less important. And Mark would probably say that it's an and. But I'm really hoping he's going to come back in, because it was good value so far.
You've got a question here, by the way, for yourself. Okay, as a marketing leader, how has lockdown affected the normal rules of marketing?
Well, it's an interesting one. The more things change, the more they stay the same in many ways. So the role of marketing to connect brands, to connect customers to organizations hasn't changed at all. I think there's been need for a lot more agility to be responsive. But a lot of organizations have run to the hills and retreated. So Coke was the first to cut their advertising spend. Others followed. When really perhaps they didn't need to. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that advertisers that continue to advertise through recessionary times really maximize the recovery period and do well in the long run. And also, if brands have worked really hard to figure out what they stand for in the world, they shouldn't just jump left or right and try and stand for something different. So I'm very much of the school of thought that, as Mark would say, let's not lose our shit here. Let's kind of heads in the freezer, legs in the oven. Which I use with my 14-year-old son, winds him up enormously, which is quite entertaining. But let's stay calm in this moment, because in the end, what brands stand for doesn't change, and the rules of marketing don't change so much.
Yeah.
So let's see if I can chuck something back at you, Ritchie.
Go on.
So you're pretty well connected in the marketing sphere. So Gareth asked the question: why do you think CMOs have the shortest tenure in the C-suite? Because you know a lot. So what's going on there?
Look, I think it's a consequence of both sort of external and internal factors that are playing out. The dynamic nature of how marketing is changing has meant that a lot of CMOs, traditional CMOs, are probably a little bit out of depth in the skill sets that they occupy, which I think is a key thing to think about, and how they sort of upskill themselves. I mean, what we're doing here today, or what we do in terms of, say, even things like content marketing or digital marketing or whatever it is, I think a lot of people are, have not come up with that specialism, and as a consequence, that's an issue. I think the external side of it is, the internal or the boardroom side of it is that there's a lot of distrust that plays in, because it takes a challenging boardroom to get and to craft a great CMO. So it's almost like if the boardroom is not behind the CMO, then it's very difficult for CMO to actually go out and do things, which I think is a big problem that plays out. And Mark, maybe you could talk to that a little bit. And I know you've had some fabulous stories about getting the backing of your CEOs in order to be able to to actually create and craft some of the changing campaigns that you've seen.
We'll just keep riffing, and we've still got 38 minutes, so hopefully Mark will come back in. But I think it's a lot about trust, and there's a stat which says that CEOs trust, only 10% of CEOs trust their CMOs, compared to 80% of CFOs. So I'll tell a little story about a pivot moment, which probably ended up me having high tenure, but might have resulted in me having very low tenure. So back in 2014, we were just about to launch this Winston Wolf campaign, and it was a big deal because the Direct Line brand was kind of dying. And so we had this great idea, or so we thought. And about 10 days before we were due to play out, millions of pounds spent on media. And I can tell this story because Paul Geddes, the ex-CEO, has kind of told it himself and wouldn't dispute this. And we were at the advertising agency about something else, actually. And he says, can we go for a walk? And yeah, sure. Very unlike him. Bit odd. What's this all about? And we walk around the block of the old Saatchi & Saatchi building and talking about nothing at all. And after one circuit of the block, I stopped Paul and said, what's this all about? You know, am I getting fired? This is a bit weird. This isn't you. And he said, well, it's just this thing that, I'm just not sure about the new advertising. He's Winston Wolfe, he's a gangster and he's a bit old, and we've had problems with celebrities, stars in our previous advertising. And, I'm just not sure. So it starts quite soft. And then he said, if there's any reason we shouldn't do it, that's okay, which is a bit unsettling because we're 10 days away from playing out. That's okay. And in fact, if we did need to write the whole thing off, then that would be okay. We'd sell it to the board. We could afford it. We could start again. In fact, if we didn't end up doing this, I'd probably respect you more. So by this stage, I realized he really fucking hates it. And that was a moment where I realized I had two choices. One was to say, well, this is our only plan. There is no plan B, which would give every CEO the opportunity to say, no, I'll help you create a plan B. That's the sort of a way CEOs can step in. Or I could say, no, you need to trust me. This is the right thing to do. Here's the logic why, and just really double down on influence and convincing and drawing on trust. And to his credit, and probably one of the best decisions he made as a CEO, he did support it, and it was brilliantly successful. Has been dubbed the relaunch of the decade, not by me but by others, and the rest is history. But that was a defining moment, because I think ultimately it wouldn't have been tenable for me to have stayed much longer in that job if I'd caved in and just tried to empowered him to create the alternative option. So there we go. Now, Mark.
I'm back, chaps. Sorry, we had a power cut caused by my wife. Mrs. Ritson has overloaded our circuit boards with various radiators and an oven and a washing machine, and hence the everything went dark. So my apologies for that. Sorry, first show and you lost your guest for 5 minutes. My apologies.
No, so it's a good prompt actually, because we've just done a little bit of a pivot, bit of riffing. That's okay. So what I wanted to ask Mark is, what's been your best pivot, and then maybe that also draws out your lowest ebb.
Yeah, they're kind of linked, I guess. It's relatively recent, I suppose. I really had lost a lot of faith in academia. I mean, having chosen that path. When I disappeared, I was just heading to London Business School, and I did about 6 or 7 years there, and then to MIT, and then to Melbourne. And as I was going through my 40s, I became increasingly concerned that it really wasn't the life for me, and that research in particular seemed awfully futile. And so there's nothing worse than sort of getting to your 40s and being on a career path that seemed to be the one you wanted to be on, and then it starts to become less and less fulfilling. And so in the end, I went part-time about 10 years ago. I gave up tenure, or the equivalent of tenure in Australia, and it's very arcane, but there are different levels of professor. So there's the full professor, there's the associate professor with tenure who's going to eventually become full, and there's an assistant professor who's your junior guy, who's just started out, a man or a woman that's just beginning. And then there's adjuncts that are just basically side labor that are used.
It's definitely Mrs. Ritson, guys.
Yeah, that was a good call.
There we are.
Oh, I'm back. Have you got me?
Yeah,
I'm back. Sorry. And so I gave up being a professor, and that was my low ebb because I'd lost faith in academia, and just began consulting far more than I was able to in the past. So I continued to teach, but I didn't do anything else, and I went off and did far more consulting. That then was the making of me in terms of, I think, getting more time to do proper work. And then it led to the Mini Mba, which is really the best thing I've ever done, because I was still an adjunct teaching at business school, but I wasn't under control by a business school. And so I was able to launch Mini Mba and say, look, this is the course I have taught for 20 odd years at business school, but we're going to offer it to you at much lower price, and also in a much more convenient fashion, separated out from all the university bullshit. And so that's been the low point was thinking, fuck, I think being a professor is basically pointless. And then the pivot was to where I am now, which is, it's a very interesting moment. My final semester was last October. So I was teaching brand management at business school to about 130-somethings. And I was also running the first class of brand management as a Mini MBA online course on my program to about 300 people, all 30-ish marketers. And I could see as these two programs went forward that what the students were learning was way less than what the students were learning on the online program. And that was when I realized I had to pack in being a real professor, because I knew it would be more convenient for me and the students to study online. And I knew it would be cheaper and more profitable. But what I did not ever expect is when it's done properly, it's superior. And that was the moment where I realized, right, you've got to do this all the time, because if you believe in pedagogy and training and everything, you have to go where the best impact is. And so, I no regrets now. We've just passed 10,000 marketers have done either the brand or the marketing course. We've had a record class, even though we did it in the middle of COVID. And we're cranking it now. We're launching an app. We're investing money. And so, I think it's been the great pivot of my life will be Mini MBA. There won't be another one that big, I think.
Awesome. Ritson, I have to ask, as a bit of a follow-up to that question. Do you believe in the concept of a personal brand? And how do you think you managed to carve one out for yourself? And what can other people learn from it?
Yeah, I do and I don't. It's a very good question. So go back to London Business School. I was doing an event for alumni when I was a professor at London Business School. And this is going back a good, 15 years. And I was scheduled to do it with a very famous strategy professor who I should probably should remain nameless, right, for the purposes of protecting his identity. But one of the top 5 strategy professors in the world. And I was kind of the warm-up act, and then he was coming on after me. And we had about 400 London Business School alumni. So I come on to give a talk, and then he comes after me. And it's Gary Hamel. Fuck, I'll just say it. I mean, we'll be honest. Gary Hamel is a terrifically famous professor, right? Top 3. So I wanted to meet Gary Hamel, and so I did the initial talk. I spent about 3 weeks prepping this talk on branding. It was very, averagely received, I thought, and then I waited for Gary Hamel to come on stage and do his talk. And he didn't. Instead, this giant screen came from the ceiling, and Gary Hamel was in his house in California. As I remember it, literally in a dressing gown, buttering his toast by his breakfast bar while the Pacific Ocean crashed behind him, through his very large, beautiful windows. And his opening question, I do remember, he said to everyone, people ask me all the time, like as he's buttering his toast, people ask me all the time, hey, Gary, what do you mean by strategy, right? And he just proceeded to talk total fucking bullshit for about 20 minutes while buttering toast. And I sat there trying to smile like as if this was good, but I was like, fuck this. I've just spent 3 weeks developing this fucking great, brand new knowledge on brand. And this fraud is sitting there in his breakfast outfit. He hasn't even bothered to get on a plane, just talking inanely about strategy. But the problem was, as he did that, and I looked out along these 400 very senior people, it was clear that they were totally fucking gobstruck by how awesome this was. And the same faces that had looked at me like I was a bit of an uninvited guest at a wedding, like, who the fuck's this? With their sort of faces scrunched up a bit, were looking at Gary Hamel like he was, Lady Gaga. And at the end of the event, I went to the pub, the Windsor Castle next door, and I basically had about 4 pints, which I find is a very good approach to working shit out. And I thought to myself, well, how is that possible? My talk was better than his. How come everybody thought he was great and I was shit? And then I realized, of course, I was giving a talk on branding and he was being Gary Hamel. And that's what they'd come to see. And I thought, right. And it's worse for me because I'm supposed to be a fucking branding professor, and I'm being taught how to be a brand by Gary Hamel. So what I decided at exactly that point was, I'll think about this more. And I thought, I'm not going to be, there's certain people that fake it. So when we do branding, when Mark or myself or you, when we do brand strategy, we look at 3 C's. You know, what does the customer want? What's the company got? Who's the competition? What have I got that the customer wants that's better or different from the competition? That's what I'm going to position on. I think with personal branding, you have to look at what the customer wants. You have to look at your competition, but you can't change the company C, because the company C is you. Do you know what I mean? And I know a lot of people that fake it to try and be something they're not when it comes to personal branding. And I think that's just like total shit. So I did apply the framework, but without I really am this annoying and foul-mouthed in real life. Do you know what I mean? I'm not pretending, but I did go for the first time at the end of that. Fuck this. I'm not gonna behave like everyone else anymore. I'm gonna try and make it different. You know what I mean? And that was a very specific decision. And I learned it from Gary Hamel. So that's the exact moment it happened. And it's interesting. It has taken 15 years to even be in the. And I'm not still. I mean, I'm a 10th as famous as Gary Hamel is. Don't get me wrong, but it's taken that long, 15, probably closer to 20 years now, to get to a point where even some people will go, "Oh, I want Mark Ritson to be Mark Ritson at this conference." Do you know what I mean? That It takes a long time, I think, is the other lesson, right?
So I'll jump in. We've got a few questions coming in relating to marketing, which is great. So from Chirag. So one of the areas I'm struggling with on similarities. Mark Ritson's approach to targeting, positioning, and objectives about mental and physical loans. To get one simple framework for successful marketing that incorporates the best of both. The Dark Lord.
Yeah, the Dark Lord always turns up. So I think, two things first. So I think Ehrenberg Bass and Professor Sharp are probably the biggest impact on marketing we've had in the last 30 years. And I really respect that. And I like Byron very much. I mean, I would say we're personal friends, but we get on, and I've got nothing but admiration for him. That said, I'm not part of this crazy fucking church where everything Ehrenberg Bass does is right and cannot be argued with. You know, there's a dogma there that I find very annoying. So how do you put the two of us together? It's fair to say I've learned more from Byron than Byron's learned from me, first of all, right? Because he's shook things up. I'm actually, although it appears to be the other way around, I'm far more moderate than he is. So Byron, as you know, is very much about pushing mass marketing and has really, reversed that narrative that mass marketing is bad. He's proved that it's not. And I've learned that from him. Having said that, I still like to apply target segments as well. And I look at a 2-speed brand plan, long and short, mass and targeted. So I'm a much more moderate figure in that respect. And the other one is differentiation. I mean, I think Byron's done a great job of pushing distinctiveness and doing it at the expense of differentiation. I just don't buy it. I think brands can be both. And in fact, I've spent my career making sure they're both. Distinctiveness doesn't have to come at the cost of differentiation. A brand can stand out and look like itself, and it can stand for things more than the competitors. And Mark can tell you more about it than me, in the sense that he's done exactly that. So they're the big two differences are, I still believe in targeting segments along with mass marketing, and I still believe in differentiation along with distinctiveness. And also, I don't think marketing's a science. I think that's doing quite a bit of harm. It's done us some good, but now I think it's doing us quite a bit of harm as well. So I think I'm much more moderate. I love the way that they've sold a brand, which is, of course, Ehrenberg Bass and How Brands Grow, how they've differentiated themselves versus the competition, and how they've targeted very specific segments of the market. That's how they've built How Brands Grow, even though inside the book it says don't do those things. So yeah, I respect him enormously. I just find it's a little, the pendulum has swung a little too much the other way, and that's that's how you should probably accommodate us both together.
So that's very much. There's a follow-up question actually from Richard, which maybe talks to the mentality of marketers in general. So Richard says, on the distinctiveness or differentiation issue, why do you think marketing people have such an issue with the and?
Yeah, it's a question I totally agree with, but I cannot answer. I think it's because Ehrenberg Bass have done a brilliant job of convincing naive marketers that differentiation isn't possible. And we're dancing around a challenge. I mean, I really respect that mob. You know, Jenny Romanyuk and Byron and that whole gang, they are great marketing scholars. We could have a little bet, I think, down the track. I mean, I think I can prove scientifically that brands are different and differentiatedly perceived from each other in many categories. I just think it's how you choose the data. So there might be eventually an empirical battle, because my belief in differentiation is a realistic one. I don't think you can own an attribute. I don't think you can have a unique selling proposition. I don't think you ever could. I think you can have more of a perception than the competition, statistically speaking, and that can drive success. And that shouldn't be a contentious topic. But the answer to your question is, I think Ehrenberg Bass have such huge influence over the influencers that dogma has become, frankly, you have to choose between the two. And by the way, again, it's only 10 years ago we lived in a world where, differentiate or die was the standard dogma. So they were right to shoot down, if you're not differentiated, you won't win. I think that was great. They just went too far. So yeah, I think Ehrenberg Bass is unfortunately the answer to that one.
Ritson, can I ask a question here? Before going any further though, can you put yourself on mute while we ask the question? Because I think your system's echoing through. That's great. Thank you for that. It's awesome. So 2 questions, actually. I'm going to be cheeky with this one. So one coming from Claire Kennedy. Is Mrs. Ritson the hot Swedish blonde? I think everybody wants to know. And then the second question is more sort of crystal ball type of thing around where you see marketing going over the next couple of years, particularly given the context of the environment we're operating in.
Yeah, which one you want me to do first? Should we do? Let's do the Mrs. Ritson one's easy. No, the reason I live in town, last Jenny and I didn't make it past that extremely good weekend in London. Happy days. Then I basically bumped into my future wife, who was working as a barmaid in the aforementioned Windsor Castle, and she just arrived from Tasmania. And so I met her, went, right, you'll do for me. And she thought the same, but said, I'm going back to Tasmania. So I went back with her. And that's why I'm in Tassie. I mean, I'm not here for the action, So no, I met and married an Australian shortly after a string of really fantastic Swedish women. And then I was, collared by the true love of my life, Mrs. Ritson, who immediately locked me down in here. And then plugged in every radiator in the fucking house on a repeated basis for the next 15 years. So yeah, there you go. And now what's the future of marketing? That's an easy one to answer. I don't think marketing's changing a hell of a lot. I think the recession is the big issue for us all now. The good news is we know about recessions and we know how they play. So I think smart marketers at this point, somebody's created a plate in Holland. They tweeted it last week. There's a plate, and the Dutch have a certain ceramic style. And someone sent me a picture of a plate that they'd made in a Dutch company, which had a quote from me saying, trained marketers know more than non-trained marketers. And this is one of the moments where that shit's going to matter. And I thought, well, that's great. That's great. It's on a plate. But that's exactly my feelings about the recession. If you're well trained and you know your marketing onions, although it'll be a very hard time, we will come out of it in much better shape. Around 10% of companies come out of a recession in better shape than they went in. And having a few good marketers increases the odds of that significantly. So I think it's all about recession. I don't think marketing changes that much, despite what we get told at conferences. And I think this is really the story now of, a cyclical moment. It's a big one, I think, that's coming. And how we handle that is the big story of marketing for the next couple of years.
So, Mark, in that context of tough times for many brands and businesses, and it links a bit to a question about what's the right approach. Who do you think broadly is knocking it out of the park at the moment?
I really like P&G. I really find it great when P&G demonstrate they're still P&G. I think Coke are the example of a company that's losing their credit. Whereas P&G, I mean, the CFO has been the most impressive. I mean, he basically very early in the COVID crisis said, "This is not a time for us to reduce advertising. This is a time for us to double down. Customers go for trusted brands right now, and we know our competitors are pulling back, so we're going to double down pretty much across most categories." And if you know the history of P&G, you know that throughout the recessions of the last 100 years, they've used a recession to build their market share, which they've then retained in the good times that follow. So I think P&G, who literally invented brand management, are the company to watch out for. They know what they're doing and they learn from history, and I think they're the guys that are doing the best job.
Super. Let me ask two questions from the crowd. I'm going to ask two questions in tandem, so you can so it'll help the flow. So this one comes from Mark Connolly. So which advertisers spectacularly misread lockdown and got their marketing advertising wrong? What should the approach have been? Empathy, compassion, for example. And the second question comes from Pawan Kulkarni. Post-COVID, which type of leadership will work? Stephen Warren or style, or Ricky Ponting style?
The best approach to COVID advertising was just to keep running your existing campaign, if it was any good. Changing a campaign to reflect COVID was a strategic mistake, in the sense that a lot of it was fluff and the consumer didn't like it. And even when it was liked, the change in the campaign trajectory wasn't probably worth the, we're saying this and now, we're going to say this and now we might go back to this. The cost of it and the change of it wasn't worth it. If you look at the data, it's clear that existing campaigns that were already good performed just as well through the COVID period. And I think the best thing to do was to keep going with that creative. If you knew what you're doing, keep going with your campaigns and just double down on your media spend, because two things happened. Everyone else pulled back, or most people pulled back. So you were getting incredible deals. I've got a client here in Australia that was getting 3 ads for every 1 ad they bought on TV. So you were getting inventory bonuses that were out of this world. And you were getting 4 ads for the price of 1. And those 4 ads were being watched by 160% of the normal TV audience that you bought with that money. So, it really was a time to take existing creative and campaigns and just go harder on the media spend. That was the right approach. In terms of, you'd have to go with Ricky Ponting, who is less flamboyant, but is a local Tasmanian. He lives I could walk to his house before you can switch off your computer. Ricky would be the better choice, just because he just was a grinder. He's an all-rounder and a grinder, whereas Warney was. Warney's something else, man. Warney's something else. Warney's a bit of a rock star. When you meet Warney, I've met Warney in person at bar. He doesn't seem like a cricketer. He seems literally like a rock star. Do you know what I mean? This is not the time for rock stars. This is the time for relatively boring, short-ass Tasmanians who are focused, which is pretty much the dictionary definition of Ricky Ponting, I'm afraid.
Love it.
So, just still a theme on COVID, obviously. So, Claire Kennedy, Quiggs as I know. Do you think the COVID crisis will make consumers more socially conscious in their purchase decisions, supporting companies who have meaningful and genuine social responsibility credentials?
No, definitely not. What's interesting is if you study crises, and Claire, it just reflects on you in a lovely way. It just means that you're a very nice person with very nice aspirations for society, which will definitely not fucking come true. But what happens when we go through a recession like this is people project what they want the world to change like onto the current situation and say, I think what's going to happen as a result of COVID is we'll get fairer, more equitable labor practices, we'll treat animals better, we'll look after the planet. You really have learned nothing about the miserable nature of human laziness. Fuck all is going to change. You know, now while we're in COVID, obviously things change because we are limited in what we can do. But watch the lazy, unchanging man return to his and her predilections, you know, immediately. So, you know, September 11th, for those of us that were in America at the time, if you'd have been there during the rest of September, you would have seen all of this play out. And by Christmas, we were pretty much back to normal. You've got to remember that, you know, Bill Bernbach talked about it, the unchanging man. It takes 1 million years for the human spirit to change. We are changing culturally on a trajectory, and I think some things have been catalyzed by this. But, you know, the world doesn't change that quick, you know, and you'll see, unfortunately, eventually when COVID goes, which might be 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now, we will quickly slump back to our shitty, unspectacular, selfish culture. And that's a shame, but it doesn't stop it from being true.
Thanks, Mark. Reasons to be optimistic. Flipping back to you and what makes you tick. So you're an upbeat person. You seem like a glass half full person in the main. But where do you get your strength and resilience?
Well, it's a good question. I really like earning money. And that seems like a strange answer, but there's two things that I'm 50 now, and there's two things I know about myself. I like creating things. That's when I'm happiest. And I'm very working class. So I went to a very fine comprehensive school in the north of England, which is actually the worst school in the United Kingdom this year on the, the Academy League tables. It's officially the worst, right? And I had a lovely email from a delightful young marketing scholar, and she was asking me about, how do I do something, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote back to her, and I could, she said, I'm from blah, blah, blah in Cumbria. And I said, I'm from there. And she went, no, you can't be. I said, and I said, where'd you go to school? And she went to the same school as me. And I said, no, I went there. And she knew you can't have gone there. It's not physically possible. Do you know what I mean? But what happens with working class people, I think, is we are very driven, not necessarily by making enormous amounts of proper money, but I like getting paid to do a good job. And I'm surrounded by people who aren't motivated by that, who are stunned when I am. Do you know what I mean? Like my normal response to a lot of people at the moment is, I've got enough money, so I don't want to do any of that work anymore. And they're like, oh, but won't you miss flying to New York? And I'm like, no, I want to dig a big hole in my garden and plant some roses. And that gives me as much pleasure as marketing. Do you know what I mean? It's just that no one's paying me, 50 grand to do it. And once I've got 50 grand, I'm going to dig the hole. Do you know what I mean? So I think the things that make me happy are earning shitloads of cash. And I don't like people that talk about purpose, partly because if you notice, they're all fuckers that have got millions and millions of dollars. And I think that's bullshit. If you're Richard Branson, sure, fucking purpose is really great. You don't know what it's like to have a mortgage and to worry about the debts. So I like saying to people, fucking earn some money. That's, putting bread on the table and paying your mortgage off is something there's purpose in that. Do you know what I mean? Feeding your kids. So I'm very happy with that idea that, it's great if you've got 12 million quid. Yeah, talk about purpose and what turns you on. Try and be a working man or woman. Earning money is great. So I get upbeat when I've earned money and done something creative. They're the two things. And if I earn a lot of money and I'm not creative, I'm not happy. So I can't earn money, even lots of money, doing something that I think is shit. It gets me down. And I can't be creative if I don't get paid lots of money for it because it seems pointless. So if those two are in equilibrium, I'm a happy puppy. And that's these days where I try and focus.
Yeah, very clear. Thank you, Mark. And bit of an extension on that. So life isn't always a bed of roses, and we all have our inner demons. So what do you beat yourself up about?
Oh, look, I'm pretty rough on myself with family time in the sense that I'm not the ideal father or husband in terms of workload. So I didn't ever think I'd have to work this hard, if I'm honest with you. If you'd have talked to me when I was 25, I don't think I would have believed I would have fallen for how much work I've done and how much I've neglected to some degree my family. I mean, I'm not as bad as a lot of people, but my wife has a brilliant attitude to it, which is, if you have to go anywhere and be away from us, I'll be disappointed. And as I keep saying to my dad, you know, he's like, well, that's not reasonable. I'm like, there's worse things, Dad, than your wife wanting you to be at home. Do you know what I mean? It's when she doesn't want you to be at home that you've got fucking problems, you know. So I think that's where I'm hardest on myself is I do feel that it's very hard to put money on the table while at the same time not neglecting the people you're putting money on the table for. And that's been probably my biggest, over the last 10 years, my biggest source of angst is that I'm not the husband or father that I ideally would be, because I'm just not mentally present or physically present as much as I should be. And, you know, you only get one shot at it. You know what I mean? You only get one go. So that would be that's the only thing I worry about. Work-wise, it's fine. I worry that I'm letting my loved ones down a little bit. I mean, I make myself sound like a total shit here. I mean, I'm pretty good, but I'm not as good as I should be.
No, thank you for the honesty. There'll be a lot of people on the call who probably have, if they were true to themselves, have the same sort of juggles going on. Yeah, Ritchie.
No, I was going to ask you sort of slightly related, but maybe a little bit more on the work front. Now, clearly, you've carved out what is a phenomenal reputation on the back of living in Tasmania, and I think, you know, currently we're all sort of sitting at home, working from home in all different corners of the world, and I guess to some extent, I just want to ask about how you've been able to sort of do that, still keep your relevance, particularly with the UK audience, for example, while still sort of being so far removed. Has digital played a role in that, or what else have you been doing?
It's really been an interesting thing. It was forced on me by my wife, right? So my wife was very clear on certain things, that we had to move to Australia, and then we had to move to Tasmania. So it wasn't my choice, and it meant a lot of plane travel. And then really, I got lucky in the sense, if I'd have moved to Australia 10 years earlier, I'd just have disappeared. But it was just around the time that you could start to do email and, you know, and then this stuff has started, that it's become possible. And I guess I am completely by chance, I am ahead of the curve in the sense that I've been doing this distance thing for about 10 years. You know, I mean, it's not just that I live in Tasmania, I live in the middle of nowhere in Tasmania. I'm not even near Hobart, right? So I think it was, I think I've realized earlier than anyone else, pretty much, that it was much better to get I still get up at, you know, 5, 6 a.m. I just go straight to work and knock off at 5 p.m. But the work you can get done in that day when there's no one to bother you and you can just literally do 12 straight hours. I'm very lucky I can concentrate. So I will do 12 hours. If you want to know, I can urinate in a bottle and I don't go outside of this little room. Do you know what I mean? I don't fear the need to do it. So I do a 12-hour day, literally. And going back in an office and having people talk to me is not my idea of, you know, I just couldn't do it anymore. So I think, I got lucky with it, but as ever, needs must, right? What happens is you do what you have to do, and it was forced on me. And it's a really interesting question I don't know the answer to. I left London Business School, and I can remember a couple of professors saying, what are you going to do? You're leaving LBS to go to Australia. And then when I left Melbourne and stopped being a professor, another one of them said, well, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And it's either complete arrogance or complete humility, and I don't know which one it is, that enables me to go, yeah, it'll be fine. You know what I mean? It will be fine. And that, I think, has spurred me on.
So we're getting towards the close, and Ritchie and I have been riffing on what might be a signature question to close these things out, just to sort of get a cap on the whole thing. So let's give this one a go. So you mentioned 9/11, but everyone has times in their lives when they can remember exactly where they were due to a world event. So what was the biggest one for you, and how did it change your view on the world?
Right, well, it's an easy one for me. So I used to work for Donna Karan in New York City, and I was flying from here to New York to work with Donna for a particularly big meeting. And the flight is exactly 24 hours. So you go Tassie, Melbourne, LA, New York, right? So I did exactly that flight. And when I got there, literally, I walked out of JFK airport, and they were shutting it down. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And Superstorm Sandy was rolling into New York City. So while I'd been on the plane, this enormous storm, the storm of a century, had not decided to go north to Maine, but had literally directly run into Manhattan and was about 4 or 5 hours away. So I went, the whole thing had been, I got messages saying, like, everything's cancelled, run for your life. I was staying at the Hilton in the middle of Manhattan. So I went to the Hilton and they were literally putting up the cardboard on the windows, and people were, panicked. And it was very interesting because everybody in America, as far as I could see, lost their total shit. Like I have so much respect for Americans. I love them. And it's probably my favorite country, but I was really disappointed with how fucking pathetic they were, because all it really was a lot of wind and rain. I mean, a lot, but nonetheless, it was like, hey, put it in context. Fuck me. It's not the end of the world. And what you had that weird evening in Manhattan, you had loads of Europeans who actually were all trying to find somewhere to have a drink, funnily enough. There was a bunch of Spanish people, and we were all getting blown up. We were trying to find, a boozer. And then Americans were just literally driving at breakneck speed, like losing their shit. And I was really disappointed in Americans. And I just thought you're the best people on the planet, but you've got this weak spot, which is you lose your shit in a crisis, which I really didn't anticipate. And I think it changed how I thought about Americans, because I had them so far above everyone else. And I saw that and I thought, oh no, hang on a minute. There is a weak point here, which I think sadly we're seeing now, which is I think they don't respond to pressure and crisis as well as anyone else. Like, I think what we're seeing in America right now, which is desperately sad, and I'm not talking about COVID, I'm just talking about the angst on both the left and the right. You know what I mean? I don't like the left any more than I like the right. I think they're all full of shit. I just don't like the way they're all losing their shit, and they just need to calm the fuck down. And there's a really lovely guy here down in Australia. There's a beer here called Colonial Beer. And when the Black Lives Matter movement started, there was a big movement here to get them to change the name Colonial. And actually, the Colonial Beer is named Colonial because it colonized the wine territory of Margaret River. And the name has nothing to do with Big C Colonial. But he went on telly, and Lawrence Dowdy's called. He went on telly. He's only about 30. And he said, look, we understand the problem. We know it's an annoying name, an insulting name to many. But here's the reason we've got this name. And we don't know what we're going to do. But what we'll do is we'll listen to everyone. We'll have a think about it, and then we'll tell you what we've decided to do once we've really had a think about it. But we understand what's going on, and we do appreciate it's a problem. And it was what's missing from the Americans, which is just sit the fuck down. It'll be all right. Everything will work out, and just have a think about things and accept that some people don't have the same viewpoint as you, but they're probably all right, and maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong. And I really despair right now because I have such love for America and I've lived there for so long. I have such despair now about the state of America. And I think I saw in those 2 days of Superstorm Sandy, the precursor to it, that they just don't, they're under too much pressure. And the Swedes, even the Brits to some degree, have responded really well to it. The Europeans have been, fantastic. But you see with America, there's a fault line there. And I think it's getting worse. And I think we see the end of the American domination, which, I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime. But I think that's the big change in society that we might be witnessing, is the end of that looking up to America, which I find sad because I still think it's a great country.
Well, look, you certainly heard that prediction here first. So that's brilliant.
Yeah. I hope I'm wrong.
I think we're all out of time now. It's now 9 a.m. in the UK, and the working day has now begun. So we are going to give you some time back to everybody. Oh, well, we're over time anyway. But hey, I just want to thank you, Mark Ritson, for a great session, super insightful. Loved a lot of those personal anecdotes that you shared with us here today, as well as all those sort of marketing insights that you've laid bare for us as well. Guys, this is obviously first in a series of shows. Do look out, because we're going to be putting a schedule of different guests and speakers who are going to be coming up in the coming weeks. Just to give you a little bit of a sneak preview, our next guest is going to be Magnus Baja from Saatchi & Saatchi. Then we've got Paul Pullman, Gemma Greaves, Karen Blankett, and Suki Thompson. So we got a great lineup for you guys coming up. We're going live once every 2 weeks for the time being. So please stay tuned for next time and next round. Mark, anything from you?
No, just to give an enormous thank you to Mark on behalf of everybody that's listening in. Thanks very much, Mark, and go for that next beer.